I'd say good morning. I think the majority of you are in the United States. It is now a little after 5 p.m. here in Dubai. And the wonderful thing about living in the Middle East is that Thursday is my Friday. So this is a great way for me to end my week and head into my weekend by connecting with all of you. So certainly thanks for getting up early and getting your coffee and your Cheerios to come join me for our session today, leading with a global mindset. Um, just a little plug, I joined Alpha Kappa Psi, the Delta chapter at the University of Pittsburgh in the spring of 2000. As I was preparing this presentation and realized that it was the spring of 2000, I laughed to myself when I said, wow, that was 20 years ago. But certainly it's been a great journey thus far. So if we take a look at what's the value proposition and why did you join in today, and what I'd like to do is just take you through a journey in terms of how I've navigated the business landscape, right, and how I've had to think outside the box and encourage others to think outside the box in order to make critical business decisions, and through all of that, and as a finance guy and a business finance guy, I'm always looking at how am I going to allocate the resources that I and my team have to impact our business outcomes. And that has a lot of implications, whether it's for customers, whether it's
Hey, Ian, we lost you. Oh,
at the core of all of that, and through building.
hey, Ian, I think
That
your
this
internet.
global mindset is and build relationships. Can you hear me now?
Yeah, you were just breaking up.
All right.
We lost the video for a couple, so you're back.
Okay, I'm back. But the key is, of course, just to communicate effectively and build these strong relationships across cultures, continents, time zones that are going to help you to be successful. So hopefully, as you take this journey with me, keep some of those things in mind, and certainly as we go along, jot down those questions that you may have based upon the experiences I'll share with you, and how I've been able to cultivate how I try to approach things from a global perspective. So my journey, I, pursued a bachelor's degree in finance. Coming out of my undergrad, I went and I got a master's in international affairs, focusing on international economics and policy. What drove that was this wanderlust, right? I had just loved learning about what I used to call and still call the world outside my window. Had an opportunity to travel when I was in high school, did a great study abroad when I was in college. And I think that's what really drove me even into this master's degree to say, there's so much more that I don't know. And I'm hungry to learn more. Funny enough, after I get a bachelor's in finance and I got a master's in international affairs, my first job was as a corporate recruiter in the medical device industry. Um, how all of that comes together was just a more so a format of skill sets that I had built up along the way and something that I was interested in at the time. But still had this knack for and desire to be in the corporate finance space, and moved back into that. And while I was working a corporate finance role, I got that desire to get back and retool again. So then I pursued my MBA. During the time that I pursued my MBA, I actually did, we did a kind of mini study abroad, I guess you can call it, was where that was one of my first kind of major introductions into the Middle East, where I planned a Middle East trek with my classmates. So we came to Dubai and Doha to visit with companies, get some lectures from my business school's counterpart in Doha, which really then started to open up the rest of the world for me. And from my perspective, I had never thought that I would actually be living and working in Dubai. I figured this trip was just going to be to tick the box, move, and I would knew that I wanted to live and work abroad at some point, but the Middle East never really came onto my radar. So after growing up in Maryland, living in Pittsburgh for over a decade, I moved to New York City. Certainly one of the hubs of international anything, whether it's arts, culture, finance. And there you start to begin and learn to understand how different cultures and are coming together to be able to drive business decisions and impact the world on a multitude of levels. So my first company out of business school was Pfizer, and so Pfizer is a global company, and my first role was in a global financial consolidation role. So my manager was an American, her boss was Jamaican, and her boss was Indian. So right there from the offset, you have a multitude of life experiences that you're working with and playing with who've had a very broad and expansive career, right? So that's just a great opportunity, first and foremost, just to learn, right? And a lot of that journey in terms of leading with a global mindset is having the humility to learn, right? And then taking a step back to say, what is it that I don't know, and how can I then build those skills and say, here's what I do know. Here's what skills I've built. Here's the education that I have. Here are the experiences that I have, the education. Then you can start to say, well, what don't I know? What are some of the things out there that will help me have a greater understanding of that world outside my window? Whether it's cultural understanding, a great deal of that, and when you're self-assessing to say what don't you know, is having the humility to be able to understand that you don't know something, you don't understand something, and being willing to ask that question, right? And you to say, yes, this is something that I don't fully understand or comprehend, and how that works in terms of what I'm trying to understand to perform my job better. And also to think about what is it that you can read. I think as people are looking to lead with this global or international presence, you really have to be hungry to continue to learn. So when you think about what it is that you can absorb in terms of whether it's reading the Financial Times or the New York Times, whatever the case may be, you have to be able to continue to add to that skill set. Part of that comes around with what you will continually have to do within your careers is what we call within my current company, Amgen, is what we call horizon scanning, right? How are you going to look at the horizon and say, what can I anticipate? What are some of the things that I need to look out for, positive or negative, that can have shocks to my business or my current plan? So through these things is where you can start to build some of that cultural competency. And the next thing for you to also think about is, where do you want to go, right? A lot of times when you think about this global mindset is, while you don't necessarily have to leave the United States, for example, you don't have to move halfway around the world, it does help to have some of that international exposure. A lot of people that I've interacted with over the course of my time, and particularly in Dubai, say, "Oh, I'd love to move, internationally, and I'm willing to go anywhere." Um, that is not the case, right? So think intentionally about where it is that you want to go. So if someone comes to you today and says, I have a great opportunity for you in Egypt, and you're saying you're willing to go anywhere, and then you say no, they're taken aback, right? So do you want to move to Omaha, Nebraska, or New York City, or San Diego? The answer may be no, and that's okay, but it's good for you to understand within yourself where it is that you want to go. And I oftentimes think about the Dr. Seuss book, even that I read to my own children, is, oh, the places you'll go, right? There are a lot of different opportunities and challenges, and you have to be very specific about what it is that you're willing to take on and what you're not. And then from there, as you start to build out this plan for yourself, you think about, what is it that you will contribute. Now, there's a lot to learn, you have a lot to offer. but there's also much to unlearn as well as relearn, right? So we have our own perception of the world and how things work based upon what we've experienced, right? So if you come back here and say, here are the things you know based upon your skills and experiences, but as you go through these steps and you start to understand how you're going to position yourself in terms of being a global leader, is that you have to unlearn certain things, right? And I'll give you a very direct example. So when I moved into a new finance role, the general manager that I was supporting was a white South African. Now, my knowledge of South Africa, prior to the mid 1990s when Nelson Mandela was freed, was this apartheid state. This gentleman was in his 60s, and I had this automatic assumption that there was going to be some level of bias, right? I walk into there and saying, well, there's no way I'm going to get this job because this guy, South African, he's looking at me saying, there's no way that I'm going to get this role. Um, that was my own bias, right? I ended up getting the job. He and I are still, even though we're both no longer with the same company, are still very good friends, right? He was actually one of the largest champions for diversity, I think, within the company. And so you have to also unlearn and break down your own assumptions of who it is that you're going to interact with, particularly when you get into this environment, because you just don't know. And that's the part of it, is, as I mentioned, is this humility piece, right? Of understanding that you don't know everything, and that you want to have the ability to interact with people on a good faith basis. Over time, things will start to pan out and people will show you who they are in terms of the business world and how you want to interact. But enter into those assumptions with good faith that people are trying to do the best they can, for the business and for whatever or whomever that end customer may be. So be comfortable with unlearning things, and be comfortable, not knowing, and being able to having the openness to change some of those mindsets. As you further interact in the world, you'll start to understand also how interconnected things are. And just to move in, I want to spend the majority of the time here on this next slide. And there's a lot here, and it's done on purpose, right? So what I want you to consider is, as you're getting out there into this global landscape, think about how things were done when you step into a new role or a new opportunity. Then you think about, how do you want it to be done, right? So when you come into a new job, and in your job maybe to improve a process or to stabilize an operation, think through these things of, how was it done, who was doing it, bring your own experience to say, here's how I feel like I can add value to this process or to this operation. Through these two things, as you go through this cyclical loop, you'll start to see how things actually go, right? And you'll start to understand systems, people, processes, and how you can actually make it affect change. As I mentioned before, the continuous learning piece is always there. So you have to continue to evaluate how it is that you're approaching the interactions that you're having with people within the company and outside the company, as well as what it is that you're adding on the outside. So for me, some of the things that I read, and we get a kind of monthly subscription to Fitch reports about the Middle East. Right. So I pour over those to see how I can build greater context to understand the risks and opportunities to my business. Once again, this constant horizon scanning. And if you then let me just quickly jump here, where you see that there's this interconnectedness, right? There's economic, political changes that go on in the world. And just to show you how interconnected things are, I'll give you an example from my last role. So I was supporting the entire Middle East in our consumer health business. And one day, the Canadian embassy tweeted something about Saudi Arabia. Right at that juncture, Saudi Arabia cut off diplomatic relations with Canada. One of the key impacts on my business was that all of my product that I shipped to Saudi Arabia was manufactured in Canada. So I had an issue where, and I will remember this for the rest of my life, as I remember exactly where I was when it happened. Is I was in Jordan for a business meeting on the Dead Sea. The general manager that I support had just gotten off the phone with his boss, who was the general manager for Europe, Middle East, and Africa, telling him how we were confident about meeting our year-end target. Now, once this news came, we immediately had a $4 million problem. What do you do? Do you ship at risk? Do you say no, these sales are lost? You cut your losses? Um, how do you manage those types of situations that really have, you can't control, right? But what we did is we put our team to work to try to get as much information from Saudi authorities as we could. We had our regulatory affairs director, making his connections and contacts. So we, in essence, ended up getting a kind of offline green light to ship our products. So we sent about $2 million worth of product at risk. We were reasonably comfortable that it was going to be accepted and pulled into the market, but we had to make a quick decision at risk, because we said, this is the information we have. Here's how we're going to ensure that we can, have some buffer. So these are the types of decisions that you're going to be faced with when you have these, very kind of global interconnected supply chains, business models, is that there can be shocks to your business at any time. So you have to think through, even if you're manufacturing something, what are the safety stocks I need in case some of these shocks come along. If you are in the tech space, if you think about countries like China, where you can't use Facebook, right? How do you navigate these channels, and who are you making relationships with in order to ensure that you can get access to the markets and to the businesses that you're trying to utilize to grow your business and deliver value for whatever company it is you're working for. So you will continually have these shocks, and I'll give you another example here in the Middle East, is that Qatar and Saudi Arabia and the UAE don't get along. They've cut off diplomatic relations for now over 2 years. When that initially happened, we had an expectation that this would last for about 6 months. 2 years later, it's still going on. It used to be that I could fly from Dubai to Doha in 50 minutes. Now that flight takes 7 hours. If now you have to go through Kuwait or Oman in order to go to Doha. So those types of even regional types of conflicts that you would have never expected to come along can come along immediately and start to change your business model of even how you ship product and how you're invoicing, how you're collecting cash, how you're paying your distributors. So this is where all of that horizon scanning and continuing to understand the cultural dynamics and landscape is going to impact your business. And sometimes you just can't control for these things; they just happen, right? But when you're able to build out some of these risks and opportunities and continue to manage how you're going to potentially be impacted by them positively or negatively, you can really start to have a better grasp of your business and what it is that you're trying to do. So as you start to go through all of these these types of interactions through the course of your career, one of the key things that happens is you're going to change, right? Your worldview changes, your home view changes, your own personal view, your view of yourself changes, right? And some of you who maybe even done a study abroad in university will see that, where maybe you, even if you only went away for 3 months, you notice a change in yourself and your ability to adapt quicker, your ability to communicate more effectively. You understand that things aren't always as peachy as you thought that they were. Having been outside of the United States now for the last 7 years, I certainly have a different worldview of worldview in general, but also certainly a different view of my home country. I still see it as the land of opportunity, as many people who talk to me do, and they look at me and say, "Why are you in the Middle East? Why are you not back in America?" And I said, "Well, I've lived there all my life. I know what that looks like. I wanted to try something else, right?" But then they asked me, "How can you get me into the United States?" And I said, "Give me $1 million and I can get you a passport." But it's still the land of opportunity. But at the same time, even when I left the United States, people were telling me to be safe and to be careful. And I said, yes, I understand there are certain threats in the Middle East, but I will tell you that this is one of the safest places where I live, is one of the safest places in the world. Um, and I think even my friends had that, who I've met here who were expats, had that same experience, right? When they were leaving home, their family and their parents were very worried about them moving to the Middle East. And then as their parents and friends and siblings started to come and visit, they realized how how to some degree Western and inviting this place is, and throughout the entire region, right? So people are able to build very sustainable lives here in order to be able to contribute. So as you start to travel, as you start to interact, even within the United States, with people who are, who have that global view, you'll find that a lot of your perceptions will change and break down some walls. Um, I certainly have found, and even the perception of Americans is we're very nice people, which I'm glad that people think that Americans are very nice. But we're also a very direct people, and I think that's something that has something I had to temper as well. If I were to come to you and say, okay, I need this done by Tuesday, thank you very much, right? That is very, that's acceptable in terms of your interactions in the United States. But here, people want to say hello, how are you, how's your family, how are you doing? They want to have more of a conversation and more of a dialogue that then builds that rapport. So it's not a transactional relationship that oftentimes we're used to in the United States. Is that people want to be able to get to know you and have that slower approach in terms of building the trust. And once you're able to build that, is where you start to see people really perform for you. And that's the key, is to be able to slow down, and where you do realize that one size does not fit all, right? And that you have to understand the cultural differences and similarities that exist, um, to be able to manage effectively. One of the key things that I've certainly learned and appreciated in this region is particularly my interaction with women and Middle Eastern women. And going to Saudi Arabia when I first started to go in 2017, women could not drive, right? By the time I was near the end of my last role in 2019, and I was in Saudi Arabia, and then one of my Uber drivers was a woman, and it shocked me. When I got into the car and I opened up the door and there's a woman there, she said, "Surprised to see me." And I said, "Well, yes, I am." But that's the evolution of how things are changing around the world. And furthermore, to that point, even interactions of shaking hands, and this is many moons ago when we were actually able to shake people's hands and say hello. um, my initial interaction, certainly as an American, you meet someone, you stick out your hand to say hello. Here in the Middle East, certain women may extend their hand, others may not. So it took me a little while to get used to that in my own head. So in particular, when I was meeting women, I would say, "Hello, it's nice to meet you." I'd kind of hold my hand over my chest. If they extended their hand, then I would extend mine, right? So you start to even change your own behaviors to be able to meet the cultural norms of where it is that you're working and interacting. So as you think through those cultural differences and similarities, you understand that one size does not fit all. And oftentimes, when you get into these international settings, even if you're still in the United States, just remember, you are not always right. There are times where you will win, and that's great, but it's okay to lose. It's okay to fail. It's okay not to get things right, because that also builds a certain level of experience and character that will help you in terms of your performance going forward, right? So take those losses. I've had some of those in during the course of my career, but I think that's helped me learn and become more resilient and taking ownership of the loss or the failure. And that's very important, where people start to build greater trust in you if you're able to come forward and say, yes, I messed this up, but here's how I'm going to fix it, right? And those are the key aspects of learning and growth that you can build. And I think that's accepted universally, of when people are willing to take ownership of any of the errors or mistakes that they've had in their lives. So quickly, just if we have this methodology of the think six, right? And so within your decision making process, as you're leading with this global mindset, is understand the trade-offs of the decisions that you're going to make. How are you responding and acting upon good news and bad news? Within the business world in particular, for me, I've always heard, make sure that bad news travels fast. People want to be able to get the bad news so they can start to plan how they're going to counteract it. The financial literacy aspect of it, every action, anything you do has a monetary impact. How are you allocating the resources and the timing of releasing those resources to make sure that you're maximizing your business value? And as I mentioned before, where it's okay to lose, sometimes you're not going to get the money that you want, right? You have to be able to then absorb that and say, okay, well, how can I do this in a different way that fits within a certain budget or allocation that I have? Innovative thinking, as I've continued to mention, is monitoring the risks and opportunities to make sure that you buffer the risks and capitalize on those opportunities that do come quickly. Professional communication, there's no one way to communicate. How are you adapting to meet the needs and the responses of your audience? Sometimes people may respond very well to very strong arm, conversation or directives. Other people may fully shy away from that and never want to work with you again. So you start to understand the nuances of what really motivates people and the types of communication that motivate those people. Relationship building, listen to what someone wants or needs. This is something that then helps someone to understand that they feel seen and heard, and that you're taking their suggestions into consideration. You may not fully implement what it is that they want or need, but at least that they feel heard, and that's a win in and of itself. From the social responsibility piece, the your stakeholders aren't always evident. So think about how this is your decisions and your allocations are going to impact people throughout the entire value chain of what it is that you're doing, whether it's a direct customer, a secondary customer, whether it's a competitor. You have to be able to interact and engage with the business space in a manner that's going to make sure you are doing it in a compliant manner, doing it in an ethical manner, so that even when you lay your head down at night, that you've done things the right way. And every company that I've ever worked with, one of the key tenets of their modus operandi is winning the right way. And you want to make sure that you're doing that so you have a positive social impact on your daily function. So I always like to kind of end where I started. So we've talked about navigating this business landscape, the ways in which I've had to think outside the box to make critical decisions, not only just from a business perspective, but just from a personal career perspective. Learning how to allocate resources, and making quick decisions in terms of how that's going to impact your customers, your stakeholders, as well as your company. But once again, it always comes back to, and I think at the core, the foundation, the building block of all of that is communicating effectively to build strong relationships as you're dealing with a multicultural, cross-cultural, international business landscape that is going to continue to get more interconnected when you're manufacturing products in Puerto Rico or Europe or China. You have customers in South Africa as well as Canada. All of these things continue to have an interplay. So when you can step back and do that true horizon scanning and say, here's the business space that I'm operating in, who are the people that I need to work with and communicate with and build trust with in order to get those things done is very, very important. So the communication for me is always key. And that's what helps you to build a common understanding and trust to do the rest of those things in the pyramid. I know I've gone for about 30 minutes or so I will pause and take questions. Thank you for your time.
Yeah, so let's go ahead and open it up. If you have any questions for Ian, feel free to unmute yourself, ask them directly, or post them in the chat, and we'll get those questions asked. I'll go ahead and kick it off. So Ian, looking back 20 years, going back to looking back at your time as AK Sci student, what from the AK, being in AK Sci has helped you kind of grow into where you're at today?
I think it's the brotherhood that I developed, right? And so the people that came in with me, came in after me, are truly some of my closest friends and career advisors, right? And so we've grown with each other along the way, and even some of those some of my brothers have been in and out of Dubai before me and have kind of passed through. So I think being able to leverage off of each other's experiences has been, from the time of 2000 all the way to now, has been one of the greatest benefits of the brotherhood for me. And just being able to continue to tap into that network just to ask for advice, bounce ideas, has been great. And as well as, my brothers have done the same to me, where they said, "Hey, I remember you talking about you're working on, field force effectiveness. Can you give me some hints and updates or tricks as to what it is that you were considering when you were doing those analysis and that evaluation?" Right. So, it's a personal and professional connection that we've been able to maintain and grow as we've built our own careers.
That's awesome. A question from Aaron. What's a mindset that you've seen in other internationally experienced professionals that is typically lacking in people with limited travel experience?
I would say, it really is that cultural competency. I think it is when you're able to put yourself in an environment where you know nothing, where you are the outsider. I think it gives you a certain humility to be able to understand, even when you are back in the kind of majority setting, of what it takes to be patient and to have a level of understanding, right? So even through my own personal international travel, I've gone to places where I don't speak the language and do a lot of pointing and grunting, right? That gives you your own humility to make sure that you don't have all the answers, and you need people to be patient with you. So hopefully, as you build some of those skills, that helps you to be much more patient, much more understanding of how to interact in different cultures.
Tara asks, you spoke a bit about cultural differences. Have you seen a difference in women in business in the Middle East versus in the U.S.? Great question.
I think it's part of it is the ability of women nowadays in the Middle East to really re-engage in the workforce. Some of that is also the evolution, as I mentioned. So I went to Carnegie Mellon at the Tepper School of Business for my MBA. And the Carnegie Mellon opened up a sister campus in Doha, in Qatar. Now, with the evolution of that university, one of the things that the university did not expect is that in their first 4 years, the enrollment was about 80% women. And the reason being is that women typically weren't really allowed to go outside of the country to go to university. So you saw that the influx of more of these educational institutions, and primarily with partnering with U.S. Institutions such as Carnegie Mellon, NYU, Columbia, et cetera, really allowed women to have this opportunity to take advantage of some really strong educational opportunities. So that then, of course, lends itself to the ability to then get more involved in the workplace. And having some more of that independence, I think, is something that builds it has been slower certainly from the United States, but the United States at one point in time was exactly where a lot of these countries were, right? So you see the evolution and a lot more of that female empowerment, which is great to see. And one of the other aspects you also see as it specifically relates to women is a lot of companies, in particular U.S. companies, are their employee resource groups, and a lot of the employee resource groups that are built are around some affinity group. So you see a lot of these women's groups are also starting to spring up here, with companies here in the Middle East, which are really focusing on ensuring that women have the right level of support, as well as the same provided the same opportunities. You can look at the demographic breakdown, particularly here in this region, and you'll see that the workforce may be 70% male, right? We know that, we understand that, we're trying to say, okay, what is it that is this ceiling for women to move into senior level roles within the region, and actively taking steps to drive more attention to that.
Good question. Thank you, Ian. From Rihanna, are there any big differences? Are there any big mistakes or social blunders that you remember doing while in another country? And how did you correct that situation after you realized what you have done?
Good question. I think I'm trying to think if I've made any of these kind of blunders. Like I said, I mentioned, kind of putting out my hand to shake a woman's hand, and her, staring back awkwardly at me, saying, as to say with her eyes, like, "What do you think you're doing?" I've done that a couple of times. I think I remember when I was doing a study abroad in when I did a semester at sea program, and I was in South Korea on the train with two of my shipmates, and it was warm on the train. And I remember my buddy Andrew just opened the window to just kind of let some fresh air in through the train, and everybody on the train looked at us like we had four heads, right? And I was like, "Why? Okay, I mean, I'd never thought to open a window on a train, but my buddy Andrew did, and everybody looked at us like you're crazy." But so you get some of those some of those types of interactions. So I don't think I've made a lot of kind of social blunders, because in part I've always told myself to sit back and observe before acting, right? Because there's a certain way that you can act, react, interact when you're in the US, and for the most part the norms are the same, but there may be some things that just aren't appropriate when you go to the other countries. So take a step back and say, okay, if I'm going to a nightclub or a restaurant, or I'm on public transportation, what are some of the norms here that I'm observing before I fully jump into kind of jump into the mix. I remember when I was in Japan, is in Osaka, and I went out I was met up with some work colleagues, and we had gone for lunch, and we had kind of a hot pot rice bowl, and there was a raw egg on the side, and I had kind of poured the egg in to cook the egg, and they all looked at me like I was crazy, and I was like, well, what else am I supposed to do with the egg, right? So not necessarily a blunder, but they were like, well, you're supposed, typically we just eat it like this, right? And I said, oh, okay, fair enough. So oftentimes it's better to just kind of follow the lead, and see how people are engaging, whether it's with food or other people, and that'll give you some cues as to how you should proceed.
Other questions?
What was the nicest country you've been to for work?
For work. Let's see. Well, I mean, UAE, I guess it doesn't count because I live here. I would say that, I mean, I've enjoyed Qatar and Bahrain, but I'd say at least I would say the nicest would be France. Just going to Paris for work meetings. The general manager that I supported there, he loved to spoil us whenever we'd go to Paris. So those were always very, very nice experiences. But but I just being able to see certain things, the some of the wonders of the world, right? Of being able to go to Petra and the Dead Sea, and to be able to go, see the pyramids. Egypt is absolutely breathtaking and amazing, as well as extraordinarily chaotic at the same time, right? So I'd say, I mean, I kind of take some beauty out of all of the places that I've been. But I'd say probably from a work perspective, France and Egypt are probably my top two.
Wow, you have successfully succeeded in making us jealous. Not gonna lie.
There's a lot to see out there, and a lot to do. I mean, that's in part kind of, the ending slide of it. I mean, the world is yours, and I really do encourage you to take advantage of it, whether it's through personal travel, seeking out the kind of professional experiences, and I know that we're kind of coming close to time, but certainly willing to entertain any follow-up questions that you may have, particularly around how you navigate just getting an international career started. But I'll leave you with, you've got to tell somebody, right? If you have the desire to live and work abroad, speak your intention, into the universe, and then tell someone specifically, like, this is what I want to do, this is where I want to go, and this is how I think it's going to benefit me. And oftentimes people don't build that into their own career development plans, where you really get somebody bought into advancing that for you. For me, I made it very clear to senior level people when I was at Pfizer. I said, I want to live and work abroad. When the opportunity for me to go to Dubai came up, I was actually just on Pfizer's internal job board, and I saw the opportunity and said, I'm going to toss my hat in the ring and see what happens. I never thought it would happen, but now I've been in Dubai for 7 years, and it's been a great business springboard and opportunity for me.